Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Muslims for Progressive Values. Today's event is about LGBT family acceptance and inclusion. In this session, what we're going to do is talk about how Muslim communities and Muslims in general can be supportive for their LGBT siblings and children. As many of you know, that a lot of parents and a lot of Muslim brothers and sisters of LGBT identified people reach out to us, to Muslims for Progressive Values, requesting support for that, for the community. So today's event is dedicated for that. And just like usual, I'm going to start off this event with our hashtag No Hate in My Faith campaign pledge. And this pledge is to get lay people and religious leaders and institutions to sign on the pledge. I pledge to refute and combat discrimination against any individuals or communities, including Blacks, the LGBTQ plus community, women, Shia, Sunni, Ahmadi, Muslims, Baha, non-Muslims, atheist, or any other, no matter what that other is. I pledge to eradicate all divisive, homophobic, transphobic, misogynistic teachings in my community and in religious institutions that I am affiliated with, and will affirm the dignity of all individuals. With that, we would like to go ahead and get started. We have an excellent speaker with us today who we have been partnering for a while now. Aruna Rao is a proud parent of a transgender young adult. She serves on the national board of PFLAG and is the founder of Desi Rainbow Parents Allies, an organization that supports South Asian immigrants with LGBT plus children. She has 2 decades of experience as a mental health advocate and nonprofit executive, and her interests lie at the intersection of mental health and diversity. Aruna is deeply invested in building a world where diversity of sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression are respected, valued, and affirmed by all. Please welcome Aruna.
Thank you, Kandir. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I want to say that I'd like to take that pledge too, the one that you just took. It's a beautiful statement.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that the work that you do is so beautiful in its nature that your work speaks for it. And we'll be happy to sign you up and send you the link. It's actually on our website under advocacy, and I'll forward the details to you, and we'll take it from there. So you have been doing great work with Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies, and I wanted to have a conversation with you because as a co-director for a community for Muslims for Progressive Values, oftentimes I get calls from parents, siblings, and LGBT Muslims that are trying to reconcile 2 parts of their identity and to be included in a part of the community. So from a community standpoint, our advocacy is to have spaces where LGBT Muslims are included, affirmed, their leadership is affirmed, and they are welcomed. What kind of work do you do that builds that network or support system from family and allyship side of things?
Yeah, so one of our major concerns is that while the LGBTQ person themselves may receive support in the community or may receive support in some fashion from other organizations, families usually have nowhere to turn. There are mainstream places, mainstream organizations like PFLAG, which do a great job of supporting families, but many times people who are of diverse faiths, diverse national origin, ethnicity, many times don't feel comfortable in a mainstream space. So our goal and our mission is to serve families, give them a place where they can learn at their own pace. And I say that this is very important. I really want them to feel comfortable learning the process of how to accept their child at exactly the pace that they want to go in. Many times I know the children are really looking for this immediate acceptance. They're looking for immediate, statements from the family. And while there may be some, people who are willing to do that, many parents, especially those who have been raised in cultures and in communities where homosexuality or transgender identities are really stigmatized, are not ready to be there. So they're not ready to be there right away. So what we do is support the family, support the parents during this period, and we welcome them into a community of other parents just like themselves. So that's important for us because we are all peers. We have all walked this walk. We have all, gone through this journey of learning about our child's identity. Many times we don't really respond well initially, but those of us who do this work have got to the place that where we are not just accepting, but we celebrate our children. And so we accept these, we bring these parents into our community, we nurture them, we support them, and we try to get them to learn the same way that we have.
That's incredible. And, just from my own personal journey as a gay identified Muslim, I think that there is so many parts of our life that we um, get fulfillment from, get our support from. And one of them is the spiritual aspect of things where, that's the mission that we have as Muslims for Progressive Values. We advocate for equal human rights, inclusion, and social justice in the US and around the world. And our communities are inclusion-based communities where there is acceptance for everybody, right? Intersectionality of identities that they come with, as long as the space is respected by that individual and our progressive values are respected by that individual. So how long have you been doing Desi Rainbow Parents work and reaching out to South Asian communities with this great initiative?
So I started in 2017, and this came out of my own experience, as a South Asian mom looking for support when my child first came out. And when I went out and looked for support, I found it through mainstream, organizations, but I never felt entirely comfortable. So I started thinking I can't be the only South Asian immigrant who has a queer and transgender child. There must be others like me. And so that's how Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies was born, in an effort to build my own community. And so that has been a really profoundly healing process for me. My family and I benefited deeply from building this community, and now I want to pay it back. I want this community to be supporting other people out there who are, perhaps adrift, don't know where to turn. And so after that start in 2017, where we just began with offering support, now we're doing a lot of educational work too. So it's really about trying to get families to understand that these identities, of sexual orientation, of gender identity, are not a choice, which is the most important thing that we keep emphasizing. Because many times families, even if they genuinely love their children, think of this as a choice. And in the case of our immigrant community, they think of it as something that has happened due to westernization. So they believe that the child can choose not to be gay or not to be transgender. And so the most important educational work we do is underline this the situation of there is no choice. Your child is not trying to act out or reject family, reject religion, reject community. Your child is merely being who they are. So I think that is really the key direction that we're moving in. The second thing that I think our organization really wants to focus on now is building allyship in the community. Many times people believe that you have to have some reason to be engaged in this kind of work. And in my case, I fall into that group, right? I started doing this because my child is transgender. But what I want to do is recruit people from the community who don't have a loved one, who don't have a child who's, queer or gay or transgender. They merely want to support this. In the same way that Muslims for Progressive Values, brings in, it's a big tent organization. It brings in everybody to work for this cause. So similarly, my goal is to bring in allies who have no reason specifically to be involved, but just want to support LGBTQ identified people and support families.
That's incredible. And that takes me to the next question, that how do you reach out and build support system for folks that might not even know much about these identities within the communities? Like, how do you even start that conversation with them?
Yeah, so it's been interesting to me, that when I started, I thought it was going to be the parents reaching out. Actually, what I have found is most times it is children, particularly children who are in their late teens and early 20s, who find out about us and refer their parents to us. In fact, some of them push their parents and say, you must go, you must attend this online meeting. So that's really how we're getting the bulk of the parents who come into our group. So I think it's really important to understand that in our communities, this idea of family cohesion, we, regardless of whatever conflict there is, children genuinely love parents, and parents genuinely love the children, and so there's a desire to kind of bridge this gap. People just don't know how. So that's what we're trying to do, and I think one of the most effective things for me, frankly, has been reaching out on social media. No, I myself am quite incompetent about it, but I'm really happy to have some wonderful volunteers, many of them who are LGBTQ identified, who really support getting the word out. And the second thing I want to say is that there are a lot of really excellent South Asian LGBTQ organizations around the country, and some of them have been doing work for a few decades now. So they have been a very important way for us to identify, who's looking for help and to bring people in.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Muslims for Progressive Values has been working around LGBT identities. We have a full lecture series. If you haven't checked it out, check it out on our YouTube channel. Also, there are scholarly articles on our website under the advocacy page. And there is a book that I would highly recommend, which is Homosexuality in Islam, that by Scott Sirajuddin Kugel, that does inclusive interpretation and progressive interpretations of faith in a way that it is more transparent, because Muslims come from various backgrounds and LGBT identities are something that might be new to people to understand and to really cope with. And to understand that, I recommend folks to check out our website and check out the video series that we have put out there to educate yourselves around the subject. So, Aruna, in your experience, what type of mindset or phases do you see parents go through in the process of accepting their gay, lesbian, transgender, queer, or intersex identified child? Like, what kind of, is there a pattern that's seen, or some kind of phases that you see them go through? A big challenge that we have in a lot of Muslim communities is a full withdrawal, right? So often parents hear it and either they are very angry or they withdraw out of the situation. From my personal experience and people around me, I've seen that this is a common thing that a lot of Muslim parents do, which is that they hear it and they're just like, block the person, block the child from all these platforms, and don't want to have a conversation about it. And also there are parents that get angry and overreact in the heat of the moment. So how do you what kind of phases have you seen parents go through? It might be a little too scientific question to ask, but I'm just wondering, like, what, is there a, a time frame where parents are like kind of questioning themselves and questioning their decisions of accepting their child, or how does that work?
Right, right. I mean, basically asking, are there patterns? And yes, absolutely, there are patterns of how parents respond. And here I want to underline the fact that our parents and families are very different based on their own upbringing. Were they raised in a family that was very conservative and homophobic and transphobic, or were they raised in a more sort of progressive household? So depending on that, obviously reactions can be quite different. But mostly what I see, at least from the parents who walk in figuratively through our doors, is that one of the major reactions is fear. And that fear can be for multiple reasons, but mostly it's the fear of they fear for the child's life. or the trajectory of the child's life. So, for instance, if they have been socialized to believe that being gay is immoral, is wrong, is sort of, something that is anti-religious, anti-God. So for them, then they fear for the child's life and the child's soul, right? Because if that's what you've been taught, that this is such a wrong and sinful act, that's what you believe. And so that fear can be overwhelming. And this is where I think what you're describing, the shutting down, that feeling of like, this is too overwhelming, we cannot handle, excuse me, we cannot handle it. So that's one of the ways that fear is manifested. The other silencing and shunning part that you mentioned is very typical actually in South Asian families. We are, I think in many ways, we're not comfortable expressing our emotions, and especially deep emotions like this. We're comfortable sort of, with expressing some happiness perhaps, but we don't necessarily know how to describe our sadness and our fears. And so there's really no language to talk about this in a reasonable way. So I think that's when the silencing part comes in, where, it's pretty much like burying your head in the sand, right? If you don't see it, it doesn't exist. So let's pretend it doesn't exist. So that does happen. And all of these are fear-based reactions. And then the other fear that really is very, very prevalent in our community, particularly in our very tight-knit immigrant communities, is fear of what others will say. So in Hindi, they say, "Log kya kahenge," right? So it's about what will my neighbors say? What will my extended family say? What will, the people at my faith congregation say? So this fear of how you will be perceived by others or how your child will be perceived by others is a very big fear. So that's typically, those are the reactions that I have seen. And there's a lot of grief. I think one of the things that happens in South Asian families, and I'm sure in many immigrant families, is when we immigrate, we have a lot of dreams for ourselves and dreams for our children, right? So we are, immigrants have this kind of spirit about them. They come here to build their lives, and they have all these visions of how their child will have a much better life than them. And when their child comes out, rightly or wrongly, they see this as a big step back. They see this as something that is a loss. And so there's grieving involved. And that grieving can also be anger, because you are lashing out at the source of your grief. And sometimes you need to be able to, and it's a learning process for us as we sort of, become part of this country. We learn a little bit of independence in terms of our thinking. We have to learn a little bit of the fact that our children have their own lives. We cannot live vicariously through our children. And that's a very hard lesson for South Asian parents, because we have come from generations of families where we have lived through our children. Our children are extensions of ourselves. And so I think these are the reactions that we find hard to understand, process, deal with. And sometimes in that process, our children get hurt. There is fear, there is grief, there is anger. And sometimes this anger can become corrosive, because we are kind of processing, the parent is processing this sense of betrayal, of grief, of feeling like the child has committed a sin of some sort. And rather than being able to process it for ourselves and understand for ourselves what this means for our child, we instead react, and again, it's a fear-based reaction where we decide that we want nothing to do with this. It is too difficult. It is too hard. It is a very painful thing to even address. And I also want to mention that there's a lot of shame involved in this. We feel ashamed because we have been taught that these identities themselves are a source of shame. So when our child is doing something that we consider shameful, we are losing face. We are being ashamed ourselves. Right? So these are all, and none of these reactions are correct. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying these are some of the reactions that we have. And that can result in very sad stories. I have heard way too many sad stories of estranged families, of parents who have disowned their children and who have said, "I want nothing to do with you." And it is such a sad, sort of thing on both sides, because the child is traumatized. And many of these people are adult children. They're traumatized that they have lost their close-knit family and their family relationships. And the parent is traumatized because they, deep down they love their child, but they cannot bring themselves to the place where they learn to understand or learn that they can be wrong, or what that they were taught is wrong. And I think that's very hard as an adult, particularly in our families where there's a lot of like sense of parents have authority, that our authority should not be questioned. We know everything, and our children should listen to us. So those are the ways that we have been socialized, and we're trying to bring this to our children. And our children, thankfully, I have to say really thankfully, in mainstream America, have some source of information and freedom to explore who they are. And that is a great thing. That's a wonderful thing to have that freedom, but sometimes it can be very lonely, to be estranged from your family that you love so much. And in these cases, I want to emphasize, none of this is the child's responsibility. The child is not responsible for the parent's reaction, for the parent's pain, for the parent's grief, anger, shame. None of that is the child's responsibility, because the child didn't ask to be born this way. The child is just born the way they are. God made the child in exactly the way that they should be. And it's a parent's job to respect that and understand that, and to support the child just as God made them. So in these cases, that's what I tell a lot of LGBTQ people will keep coming back and saying, how do I persuade my parents? How do I persuade them? And I have learned now, I didn't know this initially when I started doing this work, but I've learned now that there is no way that you can make that happen. Sometimes you have to accept that you cannot make it happen. It's a parent's journey, and they must take it by themselves.
Yes, and I think you brought up like really good point that none of these are the right ways to handle a situation. But from a parent's perspective, they're not even seeing this coming or anything like that. And oftentimes, when I talk to imams in our progressive Muslims network, through the religious aspect of thing and spiritual aspect of thing, and over many discussions that we have had and many community events that we have had, we have come to a very defined concrete solution, which is that being a homosexual, being an LGBT identified person it's not a choice. It's just who you are. It's how you are made by Allah. And we believe that, Allah made every color of the rainbow, which means that if God created me and created me the way I am, then and the world is very heteronormative and processes things a certain way, but I'm just that, a minority in this big world. And if I'm made a certain way, so for a lot of folks to kind of not see that aspect of me, that it is not in my control. I have seen examples of, in my advocacy work, I've seen examples of Muslims that have gone through there, as recent as of 2 weeks ago, that somebody who had children and grandchildren, this is a personal example, I personally know this person, had children and grandchildren, and this person had another closeted life of their own. And, they weren't allowed to express it. Built in a lot of trauma internally within their selves, just to think that they're going through this. I mean, I can only imagine what kind of mindset that they might be going through. Coming out is a journey in its own. Some people have the privilege to take advantage of the situation in their early on years, and some people not even later in their years. But one thing that I would say is that there is so many networks out there. There is so many support groups. Find out the ones that work for you to understand that, the feelings that you have are normal feelings. Myself, I went through a journey where I was constantly thinking that, oh my gosh, this can't be real. I didn't even know that it was a part of my identity until later in life. And now being, 30 years old, it was not until a few years ago that I was able to reconcile and say that there is, Muslims are a diverse group of people. There is some people that have certain practices, and in other, group of Muslims, those practices are forbidden. And same way, there is so many different interpretations of a religion. Muslims interpret religion however it fits their lifestyle on a daily basis. And to that point, I think that there is a lot of internalized trauma within parents and LGBT identified Muslims that is seeing in our communities, and families could be a great support for that very reason, to be there for their children, for be there for their siblings. And we have so many examples out there. You don't want to burn a bridge and then continuously go with it in your own paths, because that person needs you. You need that person in your life. They're your child, they're your sibling, they are your family. It's been, I think, the very rigidity of the mindset that, that LGBT identities deal with, the stigma within our communities, is often, it causes families to break in parts, and which is so traumatizing for the entire family in itself. So with that, I was wondering if in the process of having these communications with the parents, and you said South Asian community is very diverse, right? From languages, we talk about Tamil, Telugu, Malayalam, and Hindi, and Marathi, and Gujarati, and like so many different languages, and so many different, I guess, within the umbrella, so many different rituals, faiths, and all that, all the diversity that comes with it. Oftentimes it might be very challenging for you to accommodate the diversity aspect of the work that you're doing. How do you tackle that, and how do you cope with it?
Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. There's so much diversity in our community. I think one of the efforts we are making is to find out, what do we have in common. There's a lot of things we have that are different, right? And obviously you mentioned language, religion. There are a lot of differences that way. But what do we have in common? And that's why I chose this term Desi rather than South Asian, because South Asian, I think, is so specific to a kind of almost like a political identity. And I think what I want to distill is the essence of South Asian culture, which is, hospitality, love for family, sort of close relationships, food. Those are the kinds of things that are really important to us. And we have certain kinds of behaviors that are sort of, typical all over South Asia. We consider guests to be like really important. We are, people who welcome like gatherings. We are connected through extended family to a very large extent. It's not just a nuclear family. So those are the kinds of familiar kinds of things that all of us can relate to. So I think once we start emphasizing that, because this is the most important thing people feel when they walk in through our virtual doors as well, they feel understood. So many times, when you walk into a mainstream setting, there's a lot of explanations that you have to provide. So this is where I come from. This is my culture. This is my religion. This is my language. Many of these things are assumed when you walk into a Desi setting, right? Because people know, just looking at you, or like, hearing what you're saying, they're able to identify that you are from their, place of origin. So I think those are the kinds of familiarities that we are underlining. And we're making a really big effort right now to understand that the community is larger than just the Indian and Pakistani communities, which are usually the biggest groups within the South Asian diaspora, right? So we're trying to understand that there are other, people with different national origin, different ethnicities, and we're trying to figure out what are the ways that we can bring them in. Because again, I think we do have more in common than we have apart. So it's important to keep underlying those commonalities. And hopefully my dream is at some point we'll be able to offer language-based support. Right now we have, most of us who are raised in South Asia speak at least minimum 2 languages. So we're trying to create a network of people who can offer language-based support, because then that will help. Right now, I have to admit, most of our, members are, educated, at least middle to upper middle class. So to extend our, arms wider, we need to start thinking about how we're going to work with people who may not be fluent in English, people who are not comfortable in these kinds of settings. So that's in the works in terms of how we want to expand, how we want to welcome more people into our community.
That's incredible. One thing that I love about you is that you are very open to the different ideas and the mindset of actually continuously improving the community and continuously growing the community. So if there is any LGBT identified folks who are looking for family support or support to kind of help their families educate about the subject matter from South Asian origin, how can they reach out to you or your group?
They can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, on Twitter, and Facebook. They can email us, desirainbowparents@gmail.com. Again, I'll say that, desirainbowparents@gmail.com. We don't have a phone hotline yet, but that's also hopefully in the works. So if they reach out to us through social media or email, we can connect you. And I also want to say that we do offer support to LGBTQ identified folks as well on the issue of family acceptance. So our parents will also be able to offer you one-on-one support. We even run a group for people who are either planning to come out to their families or are facing difficulty after having come out to their families. So we'd be glad to accommodate anybody who's looking for personal support or group support that way.
Pew Research conducted a research on American Muslims for LGBTQ inclusion and realized that LGBT plus Muslims' participation in their spiritual communities have increased from 32% to 52%. So a lot of LGBTQ Muslims are finding the spaces that are inclusive of their identity and joining those spaces to be at the real, essence of salam or peace in their faith and in their faith-based community. So Aruna, have you seen any, or do you know of any numbers relating to LGBT identities and acceptance by their families and parents?
Right. There is actually a lot of data out there on the mental health impact on LGBTQ children particularly, but definitely on adults as well, on the impact of family acceptance and the mental health of LGBTQ identified people. And those are really difficult statistics. The CDC has them, and I believe the Trevor Project also ran some studies recently. One of the things that always comes to mind when I'm looking at them is that almost, I think, about 50% of transgender people have attempted suicide, which is a horrifying statistic. And to think that half of those who are transgender have attempted suicide it breaks a parent's heart. And many times this is because transgender people face rejection at all levels, right? So, and there are similarly difficult statistics. People who identify as bisexual also face very high depression and anxiety risks as well. So all of these risks are very high because of the way that people are rejected in society and by their families. I actually want to point you towards some very positive research. It's done by the Family Acceptance Project, which is out of San Francisco. And they have been studying the impact of family acceptance on children. So the positive aspect of that, as opposed to the negative aspect. And what they have found is that when families accept their children, all the indications of success, which includes mental and emotional wellness, it includes not using substances, socioeconomic status, as in staying in school, graduating college, getting a job, all of those indications go very, very high when the family is accepting. So when the family is rejecting, the child has a very high chance of negative effects. When the family is accepting, the child has a very high chance of having positive impact on their life. So I think that's a direct message that parents should really take to heart, that your behavior can have a huge influence in your child at any age. It doesn't matter whether they're still, under 18, over 18, your behavior can change your child's life.
Absolutely. That is such a beautiful thing to share. And from a religious standpoint, Islam teaches the message of peace. And if you're going and talking to your neighbors and your coworkers, there is, you have obligations as a Muslim to be careful of, respectful of your neighbors, respectful of your surroundings, your friends and family, and the essence of Islam in itself is progressive, and it comes from the teachings of love and peace, right? So when we talk about teachings of love and peace, to take that on the outside and not implement it within your family, with your children, with your siblings, with your cousins and relatives, it defeats the purpose, right? You're not at peace. You're saying salam and you're greeting people, but you're not at peace if you're not implementing what you're saying and what the essence of Islam is in the inside of your home, in the inside of your family, and you're only doing it to the outside, right? So your children, your siblings and your relatives and your family members are a crucial part of you. That's the reason why God has created you all within one family. So respect that, love it, and grow together, because if you accept your children and you accept them and support them, then they are more likely to be a better person. And if you're a better person, then you're a better Muslim. So with that, Aruna, I want to thank you so much for all the incredible work that you're doing. The work that you're doing is so remarkable that I don't even have words to say and say thanks to you. But before we end this beautiful session, is there any message that you would like to give directly to the parents of LGBT identified folks?
Absolutely. So my message to any parents who might be out there listening is that understand that what your behavior can change your child's life. You know, anything that you do that is positive will have a really positive impact on your child. And I'm not saying that you have to be someone who's out in pride parades. You don't have to be waving a rainbow flag. You don't even have to speak the words which say, I accept LGBTQ identities. All that's necessary is for you to show love to your child, to support your child against all the discrimination and bigotry that's there in the world, because your protection, your love can have a huge impact on your child's life. Your child will be happier, will be more successful in life if you can support them. And that's my message to all of you. I urge you, I know all of you feel deep love for your children. And so don't worry so much about what the rest of the world thinks. Think about what your child needs from you and take that responsibility seriously.
Thank you so much, Aruna, for joining us and giving us your valuable time. We appreciate all that you do, and we thank you for all the work that you do, and we wish you all the very best, and wish that your community of Desi Rainbow parents continuously grows and thrive and become that inclusive space that all of us or our parents need in this world. And with that, I would like everybody to say thanks to all of our viewers for joining us. We're going to share the information on LGBTQ identified resources by Muslims for Progressive Values right under this video, as well as we're going to share the resources and direct contact information for Desi Rainbow Parents and Allies based out of US. With that, I thank you all, and I wish you all stay safe and sound and happy and healthy. Assalamu alaikum.